T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
When I was young, I used to bump crossroads at the intersection. Simile syllables rip them faster than a millisecond. Opposite of the pulling guard, hit them with the misdirection. These rappers stink, somebody get them a fresh breath mint. These boys rookies like orientation with 10 freshmen. Spitting whack writtens, good riddance, that's a death sentence. Defend the throne, Polamalu with the interception. Gun laws non-existent, unlimited Smith & Wessons. I put on for my poly people across the globe. A small number, but we worth more than a pot of gold. My first love was a Kush blunt and an Optimo. Until I met my baby, I told Jane, you gotta go. Grow from seed, flow poetry, family straight. Never catch me with a groupie hoe, that's a sad mistake. Hit the studio, lay music real people can relate to. No matter how good you do, some people still gon' hate you. Stay faithful, this is fate, I was born and made to. Captain of your own ship, watch what.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the 2-on-1 Fantasy Sports Podcast. I'm your commish, Tommy Moe, and you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at 2on1FFB. And today, I'm bringing you another off-season episode presented by the Undroppables network of podcasts and brought to you by AnalystDepot.com. They're making fantasy analysis easy with all the tools you need to create rankings and player data, all with the help of Projection AI. Go check it out, AnalystDepot.com. And on today's show, we're going to talk about rookie running back prospects. And joining me are two of my favorite film grinders, two guys that really know the game of football and know what to look for when evaluating college players. First up is a relatively new guy to the fantasy football community on Twitter, but he's already a veteran of the game when it comes to his analysis and his insight on players. He's the co-founder of CampusToCanton.com, the co-host of the Devy Debate podcast, and the host of the Sharp Review podcast. And I knew this guy was awesome the minute I heard him on the Sharp Review podcast. That's a great, great show and someone I need to connect with. So you can find him on Twitter at Sharp Review. That's Sharp with an E at the end of the P. What's up, Felix? Welcome to the 2-on-1.
Tommy Moe, my defensive brother in arms. I'm glad I get to chop it up with you today. I really got a lot of respect for the Undroppables. You, of course, Nick, Jax, you guys are like extended family in this community to me. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you, man. But thanks for bringing me in.
Yeah, bro. I had to bring you on this show. We've been talking prospects this offseason for the upcoming NFL draft. And like I said, man, we've connected pretty early on. And I just knew like, oh man, this guy's great. I love what you have to say. I love your shows. It's great to see the growth with Camden to Canton. And why don't you kind of talk about, I guess just kind of introduce people that don't know you, that don't know your background, why you have the insight that you have about football, and then what's going on with Camden to Canton, Campus to Canton. It's
funny because I didn't consider it insight until I kind of came on to the community and just kind of started talking, and people like yourself would kind of have respect for what I had to say. But I mean, I'm a football lifer. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, my uncle played in the NFL for 12 years, was a 3-time Pro Bowler, one-time All-Pro left tackle for the Arizona Cardinals. And so I can remember being at my grandmother's house when the Cardinals would come to the line to Detroit to play, and the whole team being there and me, running around the house. I mean, that was early. I mean, that was probably like in 1993, 1990. I was probably like 5-6 years old at the time. But I've always loved the game. I played Division II college football at Grand Valley State University, 2-time national champion. Had some NFL guys playing that I played with. Most notably, probably is Brandon Carr, cornerback for the Cowboys, the Chiefs, the Ravens. Yeah. my head coach, Brian Kelly, who's at Notre Dame now, started at Grand Valley before he went to Central and Cincinnati, then Notre Dame. And my head coach, Chuck Martin, went to Notre Dame with him when he first went to Notre Dame, but now he's the head coach at Miami of Ohio. But, like I said, I've always have loved the game. I've loved watching film. Any piece of the game that I could get, I wanted to get involved with. And now I've got campus2canton.com. And if you haven't played in the Campus to Canton League, it's the best format. It's a must. So
yeah. And then reach out to Felix too, if and his crew over there, if you are playing in those leagues and you need some help, because I'm playing in my first and doing my first draft. And yeah, as much as I've been playing Dynasty and Redraft for all these years, that is a whole different beast playing in the Devy League like that. And yeah, you got to know your stuff, man. And it's great to hear that background for when you were growing up. Having those football players around you, it's such a big influence. And then, like me, I play college football as well. So that's like the insight that I instantly kind of gravitated to you, we talked about before the show, like another fisherman can spot another fisherman a mile away. And so it just, the way you talked about stuff, the way your mind's already wired to the game of football, is definitely what I gravitated to. And so I'm glad that we connected, and I'm stoked to have you here. And so
appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Let's bring on our second guest. And he's a guy I've been following for a while now on Twitter. He's the host of the Fantasy Film Lab. You can find him, find that in video form on YouTube and as a podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. His film analysis is excellent. And he's part of one of my favorite groups, the Fantasy Football Astronauts now. And, go over there and subscribe to the YouTube channel today. But you can find him on Twitter at JMoyerFB. What's up, Jay? Welcome to the 2-on-1.
What's up, fellas? Thanks for having me, man. I've been looking forward to this talk for a while. Anytime we get to talk some running backs, let alone, some off-season talk about football when it's a little more rare, really excited. And this rookie class, it doesn't quite have that top-end talent, but definitely some interesting evaluations to get to.
Yeah, and that's partly why I wanted to bring both of you on here, because when on the surface level, it looks really good. There's a lot of guys there that have some talent, but when you dive into it a little bit more, when you analyze the tape a little bit more, especially in a year where there is no combine, so numbers are kind of all over the place with testing and metrics. I feel like the film analysis really takes a step up in precedent of what you're really going to see when you're evaluating these guys. And Jay, for those that don't know Jay, I mean, you're really missing out. That's how it is. I mean, you need to follow him on Twitter. His insight, his analysis is phenomenal. Like I said, that YouTube channel and the Fantasy Film Lab is great. So, Jay, for those that do happen to not know you, can you give a little bit of your background? What makes you such a good film analysis? Like what drives your analysis when you're looking at these prospects?
Similar to what Felix was saying, just really have spent my whole life in love with football since, elementary school, really, or even when I was 3 years old. My dad asked me what I want to be when I grew up, and I said a football player. And he said, what position? I said linebacker. So that gives you some insight into where my mind was at back then. But actually started playing fantasy football when I was 8, all the way back in 1993.
Wow.
Joined my first actual dynasty league, and I think it might be the oldest dynasty league around. It's a league my dad started in 1988, and it's still going to this day continuously. So pretty cool piece of fantasy football history there.
Was it called a dynasty league, or just kind of like it kept going and morphed into a dynasty? Because like dynasty leagues, like the name, right, hasn't been around that long. Like that's definitely the longest one I've heard of.
We did not call it a dynasty league at first. In fact, it's still not officially titled dynasty league. What we called it was a perennial football league, as in, renews itself every year. But same thing, entire rosters turn over. Once you get a guy on your team, he's on your team until you trade him or release him. It's a bit of a relic in terms of the scoring system, etc., but that adds to a bit of the charm.
Yeah.
But that's really where I developed my love of the game, and then started playing when I was a little bit older. and actually coached after finishing high school football. I went to Cal, UC Berkeley,
Nice.
And didn't make it on the team there. So I started coaching at a local high school. Coached for 7 years, mostly offensive line, a few years of coordinating the offense, and really, a year or two spent at most positions, whether it's running back, quarterback, receiver, some stuff on the defensive side. So it was a pretty cool opportunity just to learn a lot more specifics about just how football works in general.
Yeah.
And that's really where I learned. And then even after that, I stopped coaching around 2010, just because of school and work, etc. But since then, just have actually definitely know a lot more now than I did even when I was coaching, just because I just love the game and like studying it. And, even things like Twitter, you get on there and you see a lot of people that have the same interests, and you start learning more and more. And it's such a great resource in that way. And then, started making these videos just because I went on Twitter trying to find things like what I make now. And I was like, oh man, I don't see it. So wanted to start doing it. And the stuff I really like to do that I don't always have as much time for because of my day job are sort of those, like hyper focused on just little small aspects of play where I can get into actual breakdowns where I like annotate the play and, pause it here and there and just talk about little things, especially within the run game. I think my background as an offensive line coach for so many years really just developed an interest in blocking schemes and how running backs work within the blocking scheme. And I think, running backs are a bit disrespected. It's probably the toughest position in running back to play, and these guys don't get paid very much relative to most NFL players. And, the whole analytics and smart football community, I guess you could call it, they take pleasure when these guys sign small deals or get cut or what have you. So, I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder for these guys. So I like to show sort of the finer points of the game and what they're doing, just because I really, really appreciate that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too about the O-line stuff. Me and Brad Wire from the Droppables, he does all our O-line rankings. So we started a podcast this past season called Unsung Heroes, which is just talking about offensive line, defensive line, but from that perspective of like, that's where it all starts. It all starts in the trenches. And, when you're looking to give you another edge, to fantasy, because there's all this other information out there, like you're saying, really looking at those matchups between the O-line and D-line can give you that edge in certain matchups, or for certain running backs that may or may not have a good week because of that matchup. So yeah, it's interesting because, it really does matter. I think you see that being an O-line coach. But then also, because it does matter so much, the O-line play does matter so much. Yeah, like you're saying, the running backs get disrespected in a way because like, oh, their O-line's so good, so they can't be that good. But you can open up a hole, as wide as you want, but you still got to run through it, right? And you still got to have the guy that's going to see that hole, see the hole develop, see how it's changing, and find the crease and get in there. And so it's funny on Twitter because it is so focused on the skill positions that like people forget how much the non-skill positions affect the game, or at least I feel like people forget how much the non-skill positions affect the game so much. And it's I don't know, it's just cool to hear. I had no idea about your offensive line background, so that's really cool for me to hear because I played O-line in high school and D-line, and then just focus on defensive line in college, and it was nice to just have one side to think about, but at the same time, all that other experience I had as an lineman helped, to be a blocker. Like you're saying, you went to coach defense. I'm sure that helps translate to how you're coaching, how you're evaluating players. Because now on the offensive side, because now you understand it better, right?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. As an offensive coordinator, my experience coaching, because I coach mostly linebackers and defensive backs, so really my experience with understanding coverages and coverage rules really helps you figure out ways to attack. So that's definitely there. And then getting back to some of the other stuff you said, I mean, the offensive line and the stuff in the trenches is, in my opinion, like by far the most overlooked component and possible edge in fantasy football, both in terms of understanding how offensive lines have gotten better or worse during the offseason, and being able to, anticipate changes in production. You look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, 2019 had this huge year 2020, their offense wasn't quite as successful. And in my opinion, it wasn't that Jackson took a step back or defenses figured them out. It's just in 2019, they had one of the best offensive lines in the game. Marshall Yanda, who may or may not make it to the Hall of Fame, but is, an all-pro caliber guard, retired. They didn't really have anyone to replace him. And their offense, is very run heavy, a lot of gap style run plays where, you really need those power blocking offensive linemen. And then Lamar just didn't have quite as much time to throw. So it was somewhat foreseeable that their offense may not be as efficient because of the changes they had on their O-line. And I think it's just a huge opportunity for fantasy players. And really, it's tough to even take advantage of because, like you said, there's not that much out there. You guys do have someone doing it, like you said, and that's one of maybe 2 or 3 guys out there,
Right. Partly
so,
why
Brandon Thorne does a good job over on The Athletic, but it's not necessarily fantasy focused. But it's only really a handful of guys. And even me with the background coaching that stuff, I don't focus on it because, in my opinion, while it's interesting to watch, it's not quite as entertaining as these runners. Ever since Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith back in the day, I've really had a thing for running backs. But definitely, man, definitely agree that O-line and understanding that O-line D-line dynamic is such a big potential opportunity for people playing fantasy football.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, for those that don't know, Jay, fairly recently, right, like got hooked up with the Fantasy Football Astronauts. You were doing your own thing before that, right? If I'm not mistaken. I was trying to look at what you had done before getting over at the Astronauts, but that marriage or teaming up, I think, is a great team over there. And they got the film room over there is phenomenal, but you guys just put out your draft guide today. Is that right?
Yeah. So started doing stuff with the Astronauts. You can find us at ffastronauts.com. Actually last year, sort of at the beginning of the NFL season, a couple guys over there that I really got to know, and they do, I think, a really great job with both film and analytics analysis. So like Jetpack Galileo is his Twitter handle. RB Keeney, Ryan Keeney is an analytics guy who really is not too set in one way. Very curious mind, and I think just the meld of stuff they had going on there spoke to me. Before that, I was writing articles over on Matt Waldman's site, which is mattwaldmanrsp.com. You can still find the stuff I did for him up over there. A lot of like video breakdown with some written stuff to go along with it. And yeah, we did just put out our 2021 rookie guide today. You can find that at ffastronauts.com. It's behind a paywall, and then you can also access it through the Fantasy Football Astronauts Patreon. And it's a living guide, so we're continuing to add to it and improve to it every day. Right now, really focused on giving as much depth on the top prospects as possible, rather than going like 15 deep at quarterback. We really went deep on those top 5 guys. Because for fantasy football purposes, other than those Devy leagues, those very deep roster things where probably a lot of people on this that are listening to this are in those types of leagues, and obviously Felix does a great job with that type of stuff. Appeals to the more, I guess you would say, standard dynasty league player.
Yeah.
So, but I think where we really provide something unique is just having the analytics and the film. And for the film stuff, it's very detailed stuff. So it's if you've seen my breakdowns, and then if you've seen what the stuff Jetpack does on wide receivers. So I took quarterbacks and running backs. He took receivers and tight ends.
Okay.
So it's not. We try to avoid generalizations and really get down to specific components of players' games. I think it's a pretty cool product. So if people check it out, man.
Heck yeah.
I think they'll
well,
be.
Jay, let me give you a nod, because my first interaction with you talking about the specifics of a player's game is I was doing some research on N'Keal Harry, and I think I found just by YouTubing, you had like a 10-minute video that essentially covered like 4 steps in the entire video. And it was exactly what I was looking for on out routes. N'Keal Harry running out routes and how he kind of faded on his out routes. And you predicted that would be an issue. And lo and behold, as high as the dynasty community was on N'Keal Harry and even going number 1 overall in that class, he has not been a productive player. So I just wanted to give you that nod. It just the level of detail that you go to in your analysis. So that's why I've gravitated towards I've been following you at least since I want to say since like 2018, maybe late 2018 or so.
Yeah, I think that was probably the off season, but between the 2018, 2019 seasons when I first got on there. But thanks, man. Those are kind words. We all have our hits. We all have our misses. Yeah, I mean, that was a big concern of mine with Harry is just he wasn't a detailed route runner at all. And, as you've seen in the NFL, especially with the Patriots, where their offense is so detail-oriented, he's had a tough time catching on. And I think that's probably where I've learned to apply the film analysis the most is not like saying, N'Keal Harry's good or he's bad, but saying, look, here's an issue, his issue with attention to detail on his routes. And when you go and you're playing with Tom Brady in the Patriots offense, like that becomes somewhat of a fatal flaw. Mm-hmm. And so I think it really helps to understand scheme fit if you do your player evaluation, your film evaluation, in terms of like asking, what's this guy good at, where his weakness is, and then try to project that and say, what teams or what schemes would he fit in really well? Because, if N'Keal Harry was in like an air raid style attack where there's a lot of short passing, run after the catch, not super simple routes, but a little bit more simple, a little less detail oriented than the Patriots, that's somewhere where he could really thrive in the short game. Mm-hmm. So it really, in my opinion, helps you understand, especially after the landing spots are decided, what can we expect from this guy? Will he struggle? Is he a good scheme fit? So that's really, how I've evolved to apply my film analysis the most.
Yeah, and I feel like that was such a bad scheme fit for him. I was definitely high on N'Keal, not as wide receiver 1 or overall 101 like some people had him, but yeah, to go to a spot where it doesn't fit his style of play or at least what he's good at, definitely we've seen be a detriment. So hopefully he still has some potential to either land somewhere else and do well, or I don't know, just figure it out. But that's why I wanted to bring you both on this show, because you both have a great experience with the game. Great minds, in my opinion, of how you look at the game, and how you're applying your fantasy football analysis to what you're seeing. And so, first up for our pod today, I've been doing recent NFL transactions. So each week there's new news, and it's getting less and less as we move along closer to the NFL draft, which is, just like less than 2 weeks away. I'm so excited to do it, especially with the Undroppables Undraft-a-thon that we have going on that whole weekend. It's going to be great. We have a great lineup of guests, including Felix Sharp, who's joining me here today. And so, for some recent NFL transactions, top of my list, and I talked about on the last episode, and that's James Conner signing with the Cardinals. And so, Felix, what do you think about this signing, both from James Conner's value and potential outlook, and now unfortunately Chase Edmonds? And also, do you think they're going to draft someone else, or are they set now with these two guys?
Well, I mean, we're going to talk about the running back class, but I think the James Conner signing essentially insulates Chase Edmonds' value. I like Chase Edmonds, I really do, but he's not somebody you're going to give 20 touches to. So they get James Conner, who can provide some balance to him, and then this running back class isn't particularly strong. So I don't think that, there's like 2 or 3 guys that you may be worried about. If the Cardinals took them, you worry about Chase Edmonds' value. But at least this signing at least signals to me that they're not going to take one of those guys. Now Jonathan Ward is still there in Arizona, and he got some run last year, a dynamic, dual, I would call him a dual threat as far as he can be utilized in the passing game. That's a real strength of his, coming out of Central Michigan. So, that's kind of my thoughts. We might get to the end of the draft, and that Arizona running back depth chart hasn't really changed that much. So if you've got Chase Edmonds he could be a late, or excuse me, a low end RB2, especially with his pass catching ability. If he's going to be kind of the get some of the first and second down touches and be utilized on third down.
Yeah. He had, what's a 1-year contract too for James Conner. So it's not, they're not investing a lot into him, and he's had his issues with being injured, but we've seen some flashes of greatness in that scheme. JDC, James being productive, coming back and having a resurgence fantasy wise, and being someone maybe more for redraft purposes that is worth drafting and taking a shot on for 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, my big concern with Conner has always been around his injuries, because and not just that he's had injuries, so you worry about that, but really his playing style. Something I look at is just how these guys really manage contact. And you get running backs like Zeke or Dalvin Cook who do what I call micro movement, a term I borrowed from Matt Waldman. And it's just little ways that, they turn their shoulder, get an elbow around a guy, get down before they get hit big, but really controlling the contact. And James Conner is a guy who just does not do that very well. He takes a lot of square hits. And I think in the NFL, you just have such physical defenders that if you're not able to really protect yourself as a running back, you end up getting a lot of just wear and tear injuries. He's had shoulders, he's had ankles, stuff like that. And when that all builds and you get a little bit older as a running back, one, it slows you down a little bit. Two, NFL teams aren't really looking to rely on an older guy with big injury history. So he gets a 1-year deal for not that much money. And while I love to analyze running backs from a talent perspective, I think that the way talent really manifests itself is in earning opportunity, and that you can get a window into the opportunity that teams foresee for these guys by looking at their contracts. And, 1-year deal with, is very low. I think it was $1.25 million. They don't see him as a starter. They don't see him as a bell cow. It's a depth signing. So could he take over and have a Chase Edmonds, James Conner, sort of 1-2 punch where Conner's the goal line back? Sure. I think that's probably, if he were to have fantasy success, that's probably the role where it would be most likely. Do I think it takes off, removes from the table the possibility they draft a guy? Not sure about that. I think the door's still open, although I agree with what Felix said. I don't think that they're going to be searching specifically to fill that spot.
Right. Yeah. And before the signing, I think I had mocked at least either Najee or Travis to Arizona, them needing a running back. And now with the signing, like, I'm going to throw that mock draft away, because who knows what's going to happen now, what they're going to do in the first round, because there's definitely some other needs. But yeah, and the other guy that got signed running back wise is Giovanni Bernard to the Buccaneers, going to a super crowded running back room, and not like Gio was, someone that we were really super high on, especially for Dynasty, maybe a plug and play guy at the right time. But now, do either of you, do any of you see any value now for Gio going to the Bucs, trying to, I can't imagine trying to trade away or for him at this point, but what do you think his outlook would be now with that team?
Well, I mean, we've seen Bruce Arians do this before with older running backs. I mean, remember Chris Johnson was kind of like an afterthought, and then he signs with the Cardinals and Bruce Arians and kind of has that one resurgent season. Mm-hmm. We could see something similar with Giovanni Bernard, given that offense is so explosive, and it's going to be explosive again next year. There's just so much to account for. And so, there's a lot of options in that backfield, but Giovanni, let's see. I mean, is Leonard Fournette still there? Is Fournette still there?
Technically.
Yeah. Fournette, Gio, and then obviously Keyshawn Vaughn. I mean, if you're going to use a running back out of the backfield, I would think that it would be Gio out of those three. So, running backs who catch passes always hold some kind of value, at least to me. And the Buccaneers are going to be the best team that Gio has been on. So maybe he doesn't have like, I'm trading a second round pick for him. But if you're a contender and, you're at the end of the first round and somebody wants to trade up to get, some developmental tight end, yeah, I would take Gio Bernard as a depth piece on my team.
Yeah, I could see that. No, it's a good point about Arians and about Chris Johnson. I hated that Buccaneers backfield to begin with, and I don't like it even more now with Gio, just because there's so many people there.
And not that Gio is the talent that Chris Johnson ever was. But,
right, yeah.
Just to say that we've seen Bruce take these older players and give them a role. I mean, he got LaShawn McCoy on that team last year, even though McCoy didn't do anything. So
right. Yeah, and so another offensive signing, super.
Hey, can I weigh in on that Gio talk for a second?
Jump in there, Jay. Yeah.
I mean, I think he's a bit of a PPR dart throw in that, Tom Brady. One of the issues in adapting to that offense early in the season was that they didn't really have a reliable running back who could work routes underneath, not just check downs, but also, downfield routes like option routes, stuff like that. James White obviously had that role for the past few years while Brady was in New England and, got a ton of volume. And so I think that's probably something Brady values in the offense. And this is Brady's offense just as much as it's Arians. They did a great job as the season wore on of really meshing their two styles. But I think probably that's just something Brady was missing the whole season, especially as it related to avoiding some of the hits, being able to check it down to a reliable receiver when there's pressure. So, I mean, Gio for me is head and shoulders above those other other running backs as a receiver, not in terms of explosiveness or playmaking ability, but just reliability.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's going to be very reliable, and that's what Tom Brady wants. He's a guy who he knows he's going to be where he needs to be, because when he's throwing it to him, it's when he's rushed, right? And he doesn't have time to really go through his whole progression. He's like, all right, if they come with this blitz here, my escape route is that running back. So he wants a guy who's going to be where he needs to be when that happens, and he doesn't have to, double check to make sure Ronald Jones is where he's supposed to be, because, Rojo's a little more explosive, and he, when he had an opportunity last year with good blocking, he showed what he can do in the open field. But really the thing that holds him back as a player is he's just a bit of a wild card in terms of where he's going to be on a given play. So I think Bernard could carve a role, and mostly, like you said, Tommy, I think that it probably just takes a little bit of value away from everybody more than being like a functional fantasy starter or anything like that.
Yeah, good pickup for real football, not as great for fantasy football. Yeah, Jay, as you were talking about that and what Tom Brady looks for and running back, a check down guy, I'm just getting the replay of the video of James White running, I think it was an angle route or something, as he's running by Tom's telling him the route, and it's like, 3-yard check down, whatever it was, and there's simpatico like that, just picking up on each other. I could see if Gio gets there early, develops that rapport with Tom, because, everything with Tom Brady is relationship and chemistry, and if he could develop that, that could be a really interesting role for him, like you're saying. And like Felix was saying too, like a later dart throw, and see when's a good time to start. Maybe not, he's never really every week starter unless someone was injured, but someone worth throwing in there at the right time. Definitely could be a good pickup for them.
I mean, let's not forget, didn't James White have like 20 something catches in Super Bowl, whatever?
Right. Yeah.
51. So, Gio Bernard could have a game where he pops for something like
similar.
That. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I always like when Gio got in there too at Cincinnati, and so I think he was also on. I think he was on Hard Knocks when they did the Hard Knocks on the Bengals. And it was just this kid that was like trying to make the team, and now he could be in a good position to, if they make another run at the Super Bowl, be a guy that can really help them get there. Another guy, just offensive player that as I was scrolling the list, Thaddeus Moss is still out there getting picked up by the Bengals. Still hoping he can make a team and do something. Definitely not a fantasy asset at all. Another just big name signing is Jadeveon Clowney signing with the Browns. That's a huge pickup for them. If Jadeveon can be the guy that he's always shown us he can be. It's just always interesting that he keeps getting pushed around the league and ending up on these new teams. I'm curious if it's I don't know, contract or a personality issue. But yeah, that's pretty much it for transactions. There's not a lot going on. I'm sure we'll see more as we get closer to the draft. Some changes, they'll shake up draft day a little bit. I'm sure that will happen. But before we get to our running back prospects and the reason why we're here today talking on the 2-on-1 Fantasy Sports podcast, let's do a quick break for a quick ad read for one of our sponsors. There is no off-season for style and comfort. With over 600 fantasy football t-shirts, hats, and hoodies to choose from, you can find a design that fits you. Each piece of apparel has been tried and tested with great brands such as Champion, Next Level, and FlexFit. From Air Ayuk to Zero Running Back, and with over 25 fantasy brands as part of the Football Collective. Find your fit today at ViridianGlobal.com. And I'm rocking my D-Wall shirt from Viridian Global today. I love those guys. They do great stuff, especially the hat too. So yeah, running back prospects. Felix, why don't we start with you? Why don't you give me your top 5 running back prospects and the reasons why? And I'm sure as you go along, we'll jump in to ask you why you have him there. Feel free to start from 1 to 5 or 5 to 1, whatever you like.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start, be dramatic. I'll start with number 5. My number 5 is Trey Sermon. And, the transfer from Oklahoma going to Ohio State and had a really good season. He's Matt Waldman's number 1 running back in the class overall, so that's quite an endorsement. I really like size at the position. I like size. I like big athletes who can catch the football. And so, save for Travis Etienne, all of my running backs are a little bit bigger. That's my number 5. Number 4, I've got Ramondre Stevenson, another Oklahoma kid, came out of Cerritos College,
Cerritos
2,000
College.
yards.
Yep, JUCO kid.
Yes, JUCO kid, ran for 2,000 yards after missing hit the first year out of high school with a kind of a broken foot and academic issues. I just really like his game, and I really like his athleticism. I don't really care what he tested at, but he's also a good pass blocker, and he is competent in the passing game. I'm hoping that he gets, day 3rd round, 4th round draft capital. That would get me even more excited about him. And I mean, the thing about Ramondre Stevenson is Oklahoma had him listed, I think, at 247 last year. And then he goes to the Senior Bowl and he weighs in at 228. So that's a really dramatic weight, weight fluctuation. He has to get used to that body type, playing in that body type. And the other thing is he started this season late. So because he was suspended after the bowl game, he was suspended for the first portion of this season. So I think that he's kind of always been working himself into football shape. All that being said, I really like Ramondre Stevenson. So he's number 4 for me. Number 3 is Travis Etienne, but man, that's a tentative 3 because the more Jay, you've put out videos on Travis Etienne and the things that you don't like about his game, and I'll let you speak to that. But that's had an influence on me. And then obviously number 2 and number 1 I got number 2 Javonte Williams, and number 3 Najee Harris. I've got Najee number 1. I don't think that he's necessarily an elite back. I think he's a well-rounded back. I've compared him to Fred Jackson. If people remember Fred Jackson for the Bills. Yeah, Fred Jackson for the Bills and for the Seahawks. Just a well-rounded player. But the thing that I love about Najee Harris's his game is we see running backs like play wide receiver and kind of do some things in the short passing game, but I think you could legitimately motion out Najee Harris and throw back shoulder fades to him. He's 6'2", 230 pounds. Like, I don't know that there's another running back that you would, as good as Christian McCaffrey is in the passing game, I don't know necessarily that you're seeing him do that, but Najee Harris can, and that receiving ability is such a plus. Hopefully he goes to an offense that can use it, but it's such a plus that he's my number one back.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you're saying too about sliding him out and throwing fades. I think it was Ian Book. They were interviewing him on NFL Live on NFL Network, and he was talking about when they were in passing league tournaments. And I don't know if because Najee's from like, I don't want to call it the Bay Area, but he's from Central California, Northern California. And I don't know if Ian Book's from there too, but somehow they were in passing leagues together. And he was saying that Najee was their wide receiver and was running wide receiver routes for them in 7-on-7. And so, yeah, I mean, he has that receiving ability at that size. I wish he had a little bit more speed, but I love that.
I mean, I'm just thinking about, let's say you're in the red zone. And you often see this with tight ends where the tight end will be attached and then they will motion the tight end to the outside and throw a fade. They did it with Jeremy Shockey all the time. They do it. Yeah. They'll just imagine Najee being in the backfield and you go motion him out to, I mean, he's 6'2". He can outcatch your linebackers. So that's something I would love to see personally.
Yeah, that'd be great. The right landing spot for him, I think, could do wonders too. And, the one guy that you mentioned that I'm like way lower on, so I was very interested to hear what you had to say, was Ramondre Stevenson. I don't like his game overall. There's things I like about his game. I just find some inconsistencies. I should have more love for him because I'm a JUCO kid too, and Cerritos College is not far from me. And then I think it was Jay that was talking to Matt Waldman's last podcast about Ramondre too. So I was like very interested to hear you guys' takes on him. But for me, I'm like way lower on them. But is it more of a size thing, like you're saying, like that's what you value more in your rankings, or the potential that he could have in the NFL? Why you have him as high as you have him?
Well, there are some, I mean, like Trey Regis is big, so it's not just size. I mean, it's his size-adjusted athleticism. It's his ability to move. I mean, he's 225 pounds, and he runs like a back that's 205 pounds. So it's just his lateral agility and, quite frankly, his contact balance. There, speaking of Matt Waldman, Matt showed a video against Texas Tech where Ramondre is bouncing off of a defensive tackle at the goal line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about a running back bouncing off a defensive tackle at the goal line. So, his size-adjusted athleticism, being that big and being able to move the way he does, but also his pass protection ability, and you would hope that he can pass protect being that size. And then he is a competent receiver. I think that's an underrated. He has like natural soft hands, and again, he's not going to be used like in the vertical passing game, but he is a competent receiver. So
yeah, he can catch. Yeah, he just reminded me of LeGarrette Blount, and I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing. At least coming out of college, I really like LeGarrette Blount, but just somewhat limited. I guess not. The very first thing I wrote about him was like, I feel like he'd be great in a Thunder and Lightning situation, where he wasn't necessarily the lead dog, but was switching it up in a good rotation with another back that was a little bit smaller and faster, not necessarily a scat back, but that's my take on it. I really appreciate your take on it, Felix, and curious what Jay has to say about his top 5 guys.
Yeah, so I'll start from bottom up as well, and first one, I think, will be a surprise to a lot of people. Felix already hinted at it a little bit, but that's where I have Travis Etienne. And just to clarify, these are my fantasy rankings rather than my, film, like football skill rankings, because especially for running backs, those two things are often going to be different. So Etienne is a guy that, based on my film study of him, I have him just much lower than consensus. But he still cracks my top 5 just because where he's going to go. He's going to get drafted early, especially relative to a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
And I do think that he has useful components of his game to where, most running backs who get drafted early are going to get a good amount of opportunity. And opportunity is the name of the game in fantasy football. But, why am I low on Etienne? The biggest thing for me is just how he deals with contact. And, you see people say like, oh, he has great contact balance. And I think that what they're seeing with that is he's pretty good at altering his speed, and he has good burst to where he can get the angle on defensive backs and linebackers. And so he can make the tackling angle awkward. And then it's sort of a lunging arm tackle where they just sort of barely touch his legs.
Yeah.
I don't see that as great contact balance. I see that as more a reflection of his burst, and I think his burst is what really stands out. So what bothers me about it more so is just, he really tends to slow down. So he'll come into contact and he sort of stops his feet and often tries to spin. And I think when guys do slow down and try to spin a lot, that one, it's a sign of not great control, sort of footwork control, and change of direction ability. But then also there's just a little bit of what I would say is timidness towards contact. I don't really see him lowering his shoulder and trying to drive through guys that much. It's more of a deceleration, make contact. He keeps his feet going after that. But when we get back to the things that I was talking about with like Zeke, with like micro movement, he's not precise with his shoulder pads, his pad level, stuff like that. And then the other thing is just, his vision, it's not that he has bad vision. I'd say he's sort of average in that department. And then when you get back to his burst and his speed, I think a lot of people thought that he was really fast, like Chris Johnson fast.
Yeah.
And when you watch him, I think what really stands out is his acceleration more so than his top end. Like his top end, again, it's not bad, but he doesn't have game-changing speed from an NFL standpoint. So, I mean, I really struggle to see anything that's elite about his game. Even, a lot of people talk about his receiving. Clemson threw him the ball a lot, but it's not like he was particularly good at receiving. It's like they just decided that because he's so explosive, they want to get him the ball in space. And I could see that. I mean, I think in the NFL, if he lands in the right situation, he might have that same opportunity. But when you're thinking of a guy like Christian McCaffrey, he really earns his targets because he's such a refined route runner, and he really catches the ball well. He tracks the ball well. At the end, you get beyond like 5-10 yards downfield, and it's really sort of a lottery ticket whether he's going to be able to track the ball and catch it. He catches the swings and checkdowns and screens with no problem. But I don't think that he's good enough as a route runner to where most NFL teams are going to say, we have to get this guy involved in the passing game to the degree he was at Clemson.
Yeah.
But, his production speaks for itself. And so I think because of that, he's going to get a lot of opportunity. And I think that he could, pay off in the right scheme, ideally somewhere with a good offensive line, running a lot of outside zone would probably be the best fit for him. We get to 4.
Real quick on Etienne, I've seen what you're talking about. I've seen other people mention it, and I've seen the clips of it. I guess where I have pause about that is, I guess, are you saying that he might be a little bit more of a product of the system and the scheme at Clemson, with the amount of production that he had at college? Or is it something else? I guess the alternative would be like, it really is him. He really is that good. He really is able to do all these things based on how the numbers look.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, when I watch him, I don't see anything that's elite. I think when he came on as a freshman, he was very physically developed, sort of a finished product physically. And for a college football player, he is very explosive. And so when you have a good offensive line and, his freshman year, that was the best Clemson team we've seen in the last 3 years. So they were really a well-rounded team. And you look at the other running backs that Clemson's had on their roster, they haven't really had, they've had a lot of NFL talent on their team, but not at running back. Wayne Gallman was there, and he's, backup type in the NFL, and he was really the lead back his last year there with Deshaun Watson. So it's not that they've had a lot of competition. Even this past year, the guys behind him were really not NFL caliber players. Maybe, some free agent types when they get there. But I think he's had opportunity. He's been in a good offense. And when you have that talent around you, you can really produce. And again, I think he's an NFL talent, which in college, if you're an NFL talent, you're going to produce, especially if you have those surroundings. I just don't see the skill that is going to really carry him in the NFL as a top end back. I think that he's more of like a complementary type guy, a guy who should share a backfield.
Okay. Well, you're right. I was definitely a surprise. I was like,
yeah, and like I said,
but
it's not what most people see in him. And film analysis. I really try to get down and chart things and make it as objective as possible. But a lot of it comes down to, what people prefer and what people value in backs. And for me, I really value backs who have good feet, good balance, and really control collisions and have a lot of skill through contact. So the areas that I most value are not his areas of strength. And so someone who, really says, I want a guy with burst. I want a guy who's, has good size, strikes those production boxes, then he can really be their guy. But, getting back to the rest of the list, at 4, I have Sermon. So I also like Sermon. And he's sort of the opposite of Etienne. He doesn't really have that burst or top end speed. And so I think a lot of people are put off by that. He's a 4.6 guy. But what he has is a lot of refined skill, really great vision. He can manipulate second level defenders, really smooth feet, great through contact. And for him, I posted a video on him, a run against Clemson, actually, in the college football playoff, where, the guy, he's Neo in the Matrix. He's seeing guys coming from behind him. I think he's just a step ahead with how he processes the field. That, again, in the right opportunity, if someone is not hyper-focused on what he doesn't bring in terms of that speed, that he can really be a productive early down back in the NFL. When we get to 3, a guy that a lot of people are very high on is Javonte Williams. And, you see the comparisons out there to Nick Chubb, and I see why people say that, because the strength of Williams' game is really that he's very strong. He's a powerful runner. He breaks a lot of tackles. But I don't think that he's anywhere close to Nick Chubb as a talent. And I mean, I really like Nick Chubb. Like he's top 2 NFL running back for me. But Williams doesn't have the same vision, the same processing of second level defenders. They ran a lot of gap schemes for him, a lot of counter. And for those that are not familiar with what that means, that's like a running play where basically the running back has to read one guy and there's like one option or another option based on where that goes, as opposed to zone schemes where, you have 2, 3, 4 gaps where the running back has to decide based on, where the D tackle moves, where the linebacker goes, which gap they're going to attack. So it's a little more intensive as it gets to what running backs need to process, how they see the field. And it's not that North Carolina didn't run zone plays. They ran a lot of zone plays. It's just when they ran those zone plays, they ran them with Michael Carter because he has really good vision. So then on top of that, with Javonte, he's not nearly as explosive as Nick Chubb is, not nearly as efficient of a runner. Chubb's much more north-south, which I like north-south guys. I think in the NFL, defenses are so fast.
Yeah.
That if you're going side to side, no matter how athletic you are, you're going to run into trouble. Number 2 is actually Javonte's teammate, and I'm much higher on this guy than most, Michael Carter.
Wow. That's 2 overall.
And I mean, I see why people are not high on him, because he's not very big. He's not very fast. People love measurables, especially for running backs. And I think a lot of that has to do with where running backs who have great measurables get drafted. But Carter, what he brings to the table are what I consider the things I value most in running backs, and also things I think that are very undervalued generally in running backs. So it gets back to the footwork, his vision. He's not someone who's running over a lot of tacklers, but he's someone who's very good at being precise with his pads, keeping his legs protected, and picking up an extra yard or 2 through contact, in a way that's similar to guys like Aaron Jones or Dalvin Cook. And I think that he has that type of potential. I don't think he's as good as Dalvin Cook, but Dalvin Cook has developed a lot since he entered the NFL. He's not as big or as fast as Cook, but I think he could work his way, if he gets an opportunity, to be sort of a poor man's Cook. Because what I think really stands out about Dalvin's game is just how much control he has. And control is not something that may make sense for a running back, because the offensive line is making the hole, the defense goes here and there. But when you watch Dalvin Cook play, the thing that really stands out is he's never surprised. He always is in control of where he's going. He always is aware of where the holes is and where it's going to be, and he anticipates tacklers and is really efficient. So he's dictating the terms, whereas I think most running backs are running, trying to get what they can get within the terms that are given to them.
Mhm.
And so I see Michael Carter flash that ability. You know, he is not on the same level as Dalvin. But again, I wouldn't expect a guy to be. And, you know, for a college runner, he's one of the most advanced in those areas, just his feet, his vision, his processing that I've studied over the past few years. So what I really hope is that he gets an opportunity, because sometimes those small, not as fast guys just don't appeal to the NFL decision makers as well. You know, you look at Aaron Jones,
Right.
and he was a 4th round draft pick. So,
Right.
you know, it could be tough for those guys to really earn an opportunity. Even Aaron Jones to this day is still struggling to get as much opportunity as most would say he deserves. And, you know, NFL decision makers are really tied to draft capital, especially with running backs, where the talent margin between, you know, the first running back and the 15th running back is pretty slim. You know, it's hard to fake it as a receiver. Receivers have to get open, and if they can't get open, everybody can tell. And then number one,
I'd say half of fantasy football Twitter too is obsessed with draft capital, especially when it comes to analytics and models and fitting into like that's the right kind of guy.
No, I mean it's huge for running backs. It really is when you're talking dynasty. You know, as much as I'm a running back talent guy, I think that it's just less valued than other positions. And then when we get to the number one, you know, same as Felix, same as most, I have Najee there primarily because of all the things that Felix said. It sounds like we see him the same way. Like, I don't think that he's an elite runner. You know, I think he's good as a running back, but what I really like about him is just his versatility, his ability as a receiver. You know, you see him. There's one play. Who's it against? It's from the college football playoff. I don't know if it's first round or second round, where he catches a little slant in the red zone, and Mac Jones just leads him into. I mean, he just gets obliterated right as he's catching the ball. He actually holds on to the ball. Not only that, he doesn't even get tackled. You know, he bounces off the tackle. He ends up not scoring because other defenders arrive. But, you know, he's a guy who's not afraid to go over the middle. He has great hands. Felix mentioned those fades. He's shown the ability to go up and high point back shoulder fades. You know, he has examples of that on film. So he's really versatile in how he can catch the ball. And then I think, you know, what really stands out about him as a runner is his contact balance. He's really a tough tackle. Some of the issues that I would say I see with his game is that he's so good at going side to side that he tries to do that a little too much. He'll make some high risk decisions where he tries to bounce it out. When you know, really with a guy who has his speed and explosiveness, especially in the NFL, you're going to want him to make the safe decision a little bit more often. And you know, he's a very smart player, and so I think that he has the ability to learn, and he'll pick up, because he flashes on film the ability to run efficiently and make anticipatory reads between the tackles. So I think he'll develop that. It's just in college, there's no reason to develop it because he's so talented with going side to side and breaking tackles that he you know, can pull off some spectacular runs doing that. So I think he has a very high ceiling if he continues to develop.
Jay, when I think of like the way that Najee Harris can be used in the passing game, be used as a receiver, I can't think of another. Usually it's like these smaller, more agile running backs who are, you know, can be used in the vertical passing game, but you don't like the play you just described, Najee running a slant, taking a hit, bouncing off of somebody. Like I can't think of another player that could be used that way, that a running back that could high point back shoulder fades. Can you is there any player that you can think of that you would compare that receiving style to, specifically at the running back position?
Yeah, for me, it really reminds me of prime Le'Veon, because you're right, he doesn't fit into that normal, you know, scat back receiving type.
Yeah.
But Le'Veon would split out, run slants, go over the middle, real tough receiver, you know, run flares and you know, slot fades and stuff like that. And I wouldn't say he like would high point it as fluidly as Najee does, but you know, made some nice plays where he really had to track the ball deep downfield. So for me, the receiving comparison is Le'Veon. I don't think his running style is the same as Le'Veon's. You know, Le'Veon really developed really excellent vision and very good decision making as he sort of entered his prime. And I think Najee could get there, but I don't think he's there yet. But yeah, that's my receiving comp for him.
Yeah,
But I mean,
Le'Veon
I think
Bell
it
was-
gets to, I think it gets to a point of with a lot of these running backs, they don't really fit those prototype boxes. And so what you worry about is that the coaches aren't going to see them that way. And sometimes, you know, Najee shows this on film. Joe Mixon is a guy who showed great receiving on film, but he doesn't look like a scat back. And so the Bengals haven't really used him that way. They use him as a first and second down thumper, when really for me, the best thing he did in college was get out of the backfield and work as a receiver downfield. And so it makes you worry that if you don't have a coach like Andy Reid, who's willing to see guys for what they are and a little bit outside the box, like he made Jamal Charles a bell cow. You know, Charles is barely pushing 200 pounds.
Mhm.
A lot of coaches wouldn't be willing to do that, but he would. So you hope that he ends up in a situation where they say, you know, I don't care about the stereotypes. This player is really good at doing this. I'm going to let him do that.
Yeah, and you know, when you're talking about Le'Veon, I mean, when he was holding out for his contracts like a couple of years, his whole argument was that he was basically the wide receiver 2 on the team after Antonio, you know, because he had that pass catching ability. He would not just slot up, but go out wide and yeah, catch a fade or catch something. So, yeah, with Najee, that was actually my comp to him in our draft write-up was Le'Veon Bell, and maybe not peak Le'Veon Bell like you're saying, Jay, that I saw, but it was the pass catching ability with the size, with the what's now I think getting scrutinized in a way, with the patience and how he kind of slow plays his runs in the backfield. But I think, you know, Jay, how you're pointing out, it might be a little bit more of he's trying to jump, you know, bounce outside as opposed to just getting upfield, you know, because that's something that you guys are talking about what you value in running backs, not something I value in my running backs evaluations as guys that can get upfield. And you know, I think we saw with like David Montgomery that first year, him trying to do too much of that bouncing and jumping outside as opposed to just getting upfield, and something I saw him improve on towards the end of, you know, middle half of last year, and something I think that like Cam Akers does really well at is like just, you know, there's a certain point where the play's not really going to work out and you just need to get your head down, get upfield, get those positive yards, and then, you know, positive yards is always going to be better than negative, obviously, right? But having a running back that has that natural instinct to do that, in my mind, is, you know, puts him at the higher tier of running backs in the league. And so, you know, I love that list. Yeah, the Michael Carter one. I mean, I listened to the last podcast you're on with Matt Waldman this week, and, you know, hearing you talk about Michael Carter, and I think you're calling him like twinkle toes, you know, and some of those micro movements you were talking about too with that he has, that like Zeke Elliott has, is his way to, you know, to move or, you know, check tacklers off of him to avoid, you know, the little bit extra contact. So he's not someone that I've done a lot of research on, but someone I need to do more on, watch more film because of, you know, stuff that you're saying. And this is why I bring guys like you on my show, so I can get better, so I can improve my rankings and move guys up and down my list based on what you guys are saying. And so, you know, right now with my top 5, as it sits right now, no, it definitely will change after this show. But I got Najee at 1, Etienne at 2. Those guys for me have kind of been locked in based off of like watching games throughout the season, like just not necessarily going back to the film grinding and looking at tape, but just guys that have been kind of high on. And I was kind of that way last year with Jonathan Taylor and J.K. Dobbins, just guys I loved watching during the season. And then for number 3 for me is Javonte Williams. Number 4, someone that you guys didn't mention, so now I'm wondering and like feeling a little nervous about why I have him at number 4 is Kenny Gainwell. And then number 5 at Trey Sermon. And Trey's been slowly working up my rankings throughout this whole process, partly from what you guys have been saying, what I've been seeing on Twitter, and just watching his film, because like Felix, you said, you know, there's not a lot of bigger guys. You know, this draft has a lot of little guys, especially at the wide receiver position. So when you get those kind of like old school, typical NFL style or size players, you definitely got to pay a little bit more attention to them, because at the end of the day, it's still a big man's game. And although these smaller wide receivers have infiltrated the game, you're still going up and getting hit by, you know, guys are 6'3", 250 running a 4.4 40, you know, so or I think that was my grandma that runs that, but let's go move on to number 6 through 10, and keep this moving. Felix, why don't you go with either way, 6 or 10 or 10 to 6 for your next set?
I'll just go the old traditional route this time, because you will hear your boy Kenny Gainwell's name. But at number 6, I've got Jamar Jefferson out of Oregon State, and number 7.
I would say that's my boy. That's my boy a little bit more than Gainwell. I just have Gainwell there, but I love Jamar Jefferson.
Okay, or I've got Michael Carter at number 7, Kenneth Gainwell at number 8. I've got Chuba Hubbard at number 9 and number 10, and there's a big gap between number 9 and 10. I've got Javian Hawkins.
Wow. Yeah. Was Javian Hawkins like Chris Sims, like number 1 running back or number 2? I think recently he's been hitting the hot take. I think it is. I need to look it up. It might be his. I think he was 3 overall. But we were getting a laugh over at the Undroppables DM group about Chris Sims and his hot take rankings. But sometimes he's Kyle Larson, they're number 3.
Yeah, he's going to be a player that I like a lot more if he lands in San Francisco or New York, a team that's running kind of a wide zone scheme. That's where you see him have the most success at Louisville. And he is, a speed back who you want to get that cutback lane, and then he can kind of manipulate defenders in the second level. So, I mean, my 6 through 10, I mean, I have them ranked, but I probably will not have a lot of those guys rostered on a lot of my dynasty teams, because I'm just not a fan after really the top 3 or 4 guys in this class. But those are my 6 through 10.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit of a crapshoot, and very curious to hear what Jay's next 5. But I have a hard time after that top 3 or 4. And again, like, I'm probably gonna move Gainwell because you guys don't have Gainwell top 5. I probably shouldn't have him there either. But he's there because it's like it's a little muddy, like even Jamar Jefferson, I love him too, but he ran slower than we thought he would, so he's not hitting that check. He's not checking that box for speed. I really love Chuba. I have no context of Javian Hawkins, so I need to go back and watch some more. But I guess of any of those guys that you do have listed, would you said you wouldn't have a lot of them roster, but is there one that you're higher on than others that, at the right landing spot, you're going to try to grab, hopefully in like the 2nd or 3rd round?
Well, I mean, I think that Javian Hawkins is going to go undrafted in a lot of dynasty leagues, your 3 or 4 rounds, or he's going to go late in the 4th round. And so just that value, he's somebody that I can get on my taxi squad. But of these guys that I've just listed, I mean, I think it has to be Gainwell because of his versatility. His speed and his pass catching ability. He's only 200 pounds, but as Jay mentioned, like if he goes to a team and they're well, first of all, he should be used in the receiving game. But if they're going to give him some 1st and 2nd down touches, he probably has the highest upside, other than Carter. I guess I got Carter at 7, but maybe he should move up. But I think Gainwell probably has the highest upside out of this group of 5.
Yeah, it's a tough ranking, and I feel like everything's going to be thrown all over the place once the draft finally hits and we get landing spots to add to these guys. I think it's really going to matter with this draft class. Again, like we talked about, that isn't super great. It's good, but it's not as we've dove in, whatever, into these guys over the off season. The inconsistencies, the weaknesses have kind of shown. But
Tommy, I just want to add something here, so because I'm looking at my rankings, I already have these guys plugged in to my NFL rankings. So I've got Kenny Gainwell as RB8 in this class, but I have him as running back 35 overall. Just by comparison, I've got Javian Hawkins at number 10. I've got him at running back 54 overall. So, I don't see these as players that you're going to be starting at least right away in fantasy. So,
well, like you're saying, it's great to have some of these guys on the taxi squad, and why I want to talk about not just the guys that everyone talks about, the top guys, because if you hear it on this pod and you have, oh, okay, Javian Hawkins, that's someone I need to keep an eye on. You stash him, and then all of a sudden he's a starter 1 week out of the blue for whatever reason. Some people get hurt or COVID round 2, hopefully never happens, but something that you can pull him off the taxi and throw him in there. But yeah, that's I have my dynasty rankings too, and these rookies are in there before a landing spot. But yeah, for me, Javian needs to move way up, or just someone I need to keep on my radar a little bit more. Jay, who do you got for the next 6 through 10?
I'll go top down like Felix. So starting at 6, same thing, Jermar Jefferson, a guy that I think, he didn't time well, but on film, he's explosive. He's outrunning defensive backs.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is just his efficiency, his great vision, decision-making, especially on zone runs. Some of the more inside, like outside zone runs, some of the more inside stuff, he struggles a little bit. Not a big side-to-side guy, but I sort of like that. I think in the right system, if he goes to a place like Green Bay, they brought back Aaron Jones, so less likely, but someone who runs that type of scheme, like San Francisco, Green Bay, Minnesota, just to give you an idea of the type of offense he would fit in, he has potential as sort of a complementary back who could have some big games if he develops. After that, I do have Gainwell, and for me, Gainwell is a guy I would have liked to have seen play another year, just because his only year playing running back basically was the year we have on film for 2019, and he looks to me like a guy who's good at everything but not great at anything. And I think a lot of that is just that he's learning the position. Probably the best thing he does for me is he's a very good open field runner. Good vision in the open field, can break tackles a little bit better than what I think he's given credit for. He doesn't have that top end. He doesn't have amazing burst, but just so versatile. And I think that a lot of his issues probably would have been addressed with another year. Like as a receiver, I think he has the talent to do it, but his routes, weren't necessarily super crisp. And I worry that if he doesn't get better as a route runner, he may not be good enough to get enough opportunity, enough targets to really make a difference from a fantasy perspective. But I don't think that it's that he can't. I think it's just he was learning the position. He played quarterback in high school, and I think with another year on film, he probably would have answered a lot of those questions. But it just makes it a bit harder of a projection. After Gainwell, I got Chuba. Another efficient runner, great vision, very explosive, linear runner. I really like him. It's just, the guy goes down with a breath. Like, if you touch him with a finger on the foot, he's going to fall down. And so I just wish that he had a little bit better contact balance, ran with better feet through traffic. You just see him get tripped up a lot. So I think that's going to be a big problem for him at the next level. But as a complimentary guy, I think he'll break off some big runs, one because of his speed, but also just because of his vision and his running style. After that, at 9, I'll put Ramondre. And I think Ramondre has potential, had very atypical career path in college that you guys already touched on. And one thing that actually concerns me is there's always an issue, right? That whether it's an injury or suspension, transferring from JUCO, there's always something. And you say, well, what's going on? Why is there always something? And not saying that he's doing anything wrong. I don't know enough about him. I never talked to the guy. But just as someone who doesn't get to know these guys, you wonder, how is he going to improve that reliability as we go forward? And I think it's a great sign that he got in really good shape for his pro day, because he never really, I talked about this on the pod that you referenced a couple times with Matt recently. He never really had an opportunity to be consistent in a program and get in shape. And the fact that seems to be doing that now, I think is a good sign. He's great in pass protection, so I think he'll have a role in the NFL. He can catch the ball, has a lot of physical talent, really has that, like Felix said, that ability to go lateral, much more agile than your typical 230, 240-pound runner. What I'd like to see with him, though, is just that efficiency, and I think that he really struggled at times processing the second level. Like he would get surprised by linebackers when they show up in the hole at times, just when I watch him on film. So I think just, with more experience of the speed of the game, I think he could really improve in that area. And like I said, I think he'll have a role because what he brings in the passing game to start, and then he can sort of grow into it as a runner. And the talent's there, just has to develop the decision making and processing. At 10, I have I'll go with a bit of a sleeper, Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, nice.
He's 10, so I'm not super high on him, but I think that if things fall right, he can be a guy, especially in the early downs. Very good vision, good footwork, good decision maker. My issues with him are that he's another guy who doesn't have a ton of burst. Not really even going to outrun linebackers in the open field. And then also, at times, he seems to shy away from contact, especially in the pass game and pass protection. But yeah, that's what I have at number 10.
Nice. Yeah, I like Herbert. He just misses the top 10 for me. The comment about Chuba, and it's one I've seen a bit on Twitter, and I watch a lot. I really, I just said I told Felix like Jamar's my boy. I actually a bit of a Chuba homer. I've really liked his game since 2019, and obviously 2020 was what it was. But he really popped off the screen for me, and someone I've always liked. And so I I get the argument about him not having great contact balance and falling down easily and not being hard to take down. But one thing I did notice is that Oklahoma State used him a ton at the goal line. And for someone that has the argument of that he has a hard time, staying up and not great contact balance, which I do see and I do understand the argument for, the fact that they used him so much at the goal line, he was successful on the goal line, getting short yardage touchdowns. Well, I guess for me, it kind of, I don't know, like it doesn't mesh as much. Like, did you guys see the same thing, or do you get what I'm saying? Like when he's being used so much, or like I guess does it not even matter the fact that they used them at the goal line? He's still not breaking tackles.
Yeah, so I mean, I think they use him at the goal line. He's still not breaking tackles.
Okay,
but that doesn't mean that it was a bad decision. I mean, he has great vision. He's a great decision maker, very efficient, gets north south. And that's a guy. Those are guys that I like to use near the goal line, whether they're going to run people over or not. Jamal Charles was a great goal line back, but he's not someone who's going to run over a linebacker or talking about with Ramondre, a defensive tackle. Like a defensive tackle hits Jamal Charles square, he's going down. Same thing with Chuba. And so, just because he's not a thumper doesn't mean he may not be able to find a role. And a guy that I liken him to a bit is Philip Lindsay. And I think Lindsay has a bit more contact balance than Chuba, but he's not quite as big.
Mm-hmm.
But just in terms of being an efficient runner who really anticipates well, and I think he could have a similar role where he's really an explosive guy in sort of a shared backfield. But I think because of his size, because of his ability through contact, his ceiling is limited a bit in the same way we see with Lindsay.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to find excuses to have him ranked as high as I've had him. Originally, I think at the highest point, he was like my running back 3 or 4. But like I said, when I start my list before I actually dive into watching film and then backing that up with analytics, it's really just like, who do I like? Who do I like from watching college football throughout the season? Who do I want to start with? And my rankings change throughout the entire process because of that. Because I start with guys I like and then realize, okay, these are actually guys that are showing it on tape, showing the consistency, and who other guys like too. That definitely plays a factor. I try to keep to my own opinion as much as possible. But again, why I have guys like you on my show is to get your guys' opinion, share that with the listeners, and hopefully, have that formulate and play a factor into our rankings, because you guys are definitely watching a ton of film, seeing a lot of stuff, and having a great process to your analysis.
Tommy Mo, with Chuba Hubbard, I mean, he had that great 2019, and then in 2020 you have the pandemic, And then you also have one of their first couple of games of the season, they lose their quarterback, their starting quarterback in Spencer Sanders. They start a freshman. Not only that, but I mean, they're like one of their first couple of games was against Tulsa. And for those who don't know, Tulsa has a really, really good defense. And Spencer Sanders went out in that game and they just kind of never recovered. Chuba just never really recovered after that because the offense was kind of stymied. So, he's still a player that could find himself in the right system and pop.
Yeah. And like I say about the quarterback, because as I was watching Chuba and then watching Tylan Wallace, I was like hating what Tylan Wallace had to deal with because there's so many times where the quarterback was just like staring at the first guy, and not going through his progressions, not seeing that Tylan Wallace was open. And I felt that just hurt Wallace's production a little bit more. He still did well, but could have been better. Same thing with Chuba. Also had the thing with his coach at the beginning of the season, and who knows, how that really messed up that relationship, if that really had an effect, on play calling or performance or whatever. But he was one of the most vocal guys about it, and they also said they moved past it, but there's a lot of other factors that happen, and like you said too, with the pandemic. I mean, that alone, I think even especially for the NFL and for fantasy, I've been preaching people that had rough 2020s, like we can't really hold that so hard against them because it was exceptional. It wasn't a normal year. It wasn't like they went out and played regular games and everything was regular and then they did bad. If they did great, awesome, that's great. But if they did bad, you got to cut them a little bit of slack, at least in my opinion. So for my top six, I'm glad that we're all on the same page with Jamar Jefferson at number 6. I love that. He's been a little bit higher at one point. I think as high as RB4 for me, but I think right around the 5, 6, 7 range is a good spot for him. Landing spot could totally boost him up a little bit higher. I got Chuba at 7, still holding out hope and being a homer there. Michael Carter at 8, probably move up a little bit. Ramondre Stevenson at 9, and number 10 is a guy that you guys didn't mention, but for me, number 10 is Elijah Mitchell. And because you guys didn't mention it, I don't know if anyone has any commentary on Elijah Mitchell. I just really like his speed now, and he was able to be pretty productive. Was it for Louisville?
UL, Louisiana Lafayette. So Elijah Mitchell, very productive in that UL scheme. UL is low key a running back, really good NFL running back producer for a G5 school. Raymond Calais was a 7th round draft pick for the Rams, actually is in the NFL. And then they've got 2 guys who have NFL potential right now in Elijah Mitchell, as you mentioned, and then Trey Regis, who's a 220-pound back who can actually catch. And then the guy that's there right now, redshirt junior named Chris Smith, is a speed back, and he might be the best of them all. I saw Elijah Mitchell. That team always does well running the football. And I saw his testing, and I'm like, okay, I need to go back and take a look at him. Especially, I mean, you don't scout helmets, but UL has put some NFL talent, put some talent in the NFL at that position, including in this class. So, and he's number 11 for me. That's the other thing I was going to say.
Okay,
Elijah Mitchell's number. Yeah, he's right there for me.
Yeah.
So,
Are they the Raging Cajuns? They're the Raging Cajuns, right?
Yeah, they are.
Right on.
I wrote a story on them, and I had their chaplain reach out to me and tell me it's not ULL, it's UL. So.
All right.
Yeah, I mean he's in that same tier for me. So same thing that Felix said. There's it's not a super deep class. So as you start getting down into the 8, 9, 10 range, you have a handful of guys who all fall into that same category of if things break right, that you can see it roll for them in the NFL. But they're sort of borderline roster guys. And you can name a bunch of guys in that category, and I feel like we all sort of named a different one, so that's
right.
That's great because it gives people exposure to different guys,
And so, without going okay, let's do the next 10. How about just one guy that maybe depending on landing spot might crack the top 10 for you, and then one guy that you're like way lower on that you just think is a total bust. Felix, let's start with you. Oh, you're muted.
the guy who could be a total bust is Etienne, for all the reasons that Jay articulated. Did you ask for a guy that I'm higher on than
Yeah,
most?
but that you right now have ranked like 10 plus.
I mean, so this is I'll be honest. So in last year's class, there were a bunch of guys, UDFAs, day 3 guys that I liked: Levante Bellamy, Jonathan Ward, Pete Guerrero. He didn't even get signed as a UDFA. It was like a couple of weeks after the season that he got signed. I don't see like that type of player in this class. I mentioned Trey Regis. I like the combination of his size and his ability to catch the ball. I liked Spencer Brown out of UAB, but UAB lies with their height and weight listings. He was listed at 220 pounds and he weighed in at 208. Austin Watkins was listed as 6'3" and measured in at the Senior Bowl at 6 foot. I mean, so I thought that Spencer Brown could be kind of a 2-down thumper, but I don't have that deep. Chris Evans, maybe Chris Evans out of Michigan. But I don't have a guy that I'm super passionate about like I did last year, where I kept waiting to see like when Levante Bellamy is going to get elevated from the practice squad to the Broncos starting roster, which he did in like week 16 and then immediately got hurt. But I just don't have that guy. I don't have a number of those guys this year. It's Ramondre Stevenson, who I'm higher on than most. That's the guy for me.
Yeah, I feel you with that late undrafted guy, someone you're hoping for, someone you're putting out there as a long shot. Last year for me, it was Siwo Olonilua from TCU. Fell in love with them partly because the Footwork King on Twitter was just like working with them and hyping him up. And I watched his film, like, this guy's freaking humongous. He's huge. Like, he can run. Let's see what he can do. And we're still waiting. I think he's still on the active roster for the Cowboys. I hold a couple of shares in some deep leagues, and then 2 years ago it was Myles Gaskin. And so I've done these last couple of years, kind of your long shot kind of candidates, like do a thread or an article on guys that I have planned to flag on, so to speak. And I'm right there with you, Felix. I have no idea who I want to do that with. I have no idea. I was almost going to switch to wide receiver because it's always been a running back who I think that can find a way. And Myles Gaskin was the guy. He found a way to get to a starting role. Hopefully he can keep it. They're probably going to draft someone and he won't keep it. But that was, kind of a victory lap I have for just seeing like, okay, this guy's got some talent. He just needs an opportunity. I don't see that anywhere. Or if I do, I'm kind of just dart throwing it, and trying to just pick someone at random who I think could make it. But
Demetric Felton is a versatile player out of UCLA.
I like Demetric.
That could be it. But I just don't feel super passionate about these lower ranked guys.
Keep him at wide receiver, when he's played running back the whole time, and that seems like the natural fit for him.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, it was so tough to watch film on Demetric, and you're seeing him run routes out of the running back position, but he's not running wide receiver routes. So it's hard to like gauge him as a wide receiver because he's not running those typical routes. I think he had a couple wheel routes that turned into like a fade, but
he ran as a running back at the Senior Bowl, so that would lead me to believe that he's going into the NFL as a running back.
Yeah, I hope he is. But stupid fancy pros where I do my rankings as a wide receiver, so I can't move them. Jay, how about you? Who's one guy that you're totally low on, and one guy that's outside the top 10 you might be a little higher on?
I'm right there with a lot of what you guys said about in this class. It's like even within the top 10, there are guys that you don't feel that great about. So if there was anyone that I was real excited about, they'd be in my top 10. Some guys that I think, could have a role that we didn't talk about. I echo what Felix said about Chris Evans, and then also, Larry Roundtree. Show some good stuff with vision, footwork on film. I'm not sure he has enough to really stick and earn a role as a regular contributor, but someone who could, make it and have a role in the NFL. The guy I'm lower on than most, we already talked about it, is Etienne. And then I think that as you get down into the bottom, there's no one that we haven't talked about yet that I think is vastly overrated. Puka Williams is a guy who's been talked about a little bit that I'm not super high on. Just think he's very undisciplined as a runner. Just some bizarre things that you see on film with him, with his footwork. Looks like we're getting family bombed in the background.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. They're grabbing something when they're out.
I mean, I think this running back class is just not super deep, man. So probably most of the meat we've already taken off the bone with what we've talked about.
Yeah, Puka's one of those guys. Like I don't know, maybe it was just the name or something. Like I wanted to like him a little bit more. And I just couldn't. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. There's a diamond in the rough here somewhere, right? There's always a guy that's going to slip through the cracks, that's going to slip through the rankings, the prospects, the scouts, and totally just come out of nowhere. I feel like last year, that was kind of Antonio Gibson for a lot of people. I think we still covered him in like our top 50, but I don't know if anyone really had him ranked that high. But yeah, it's going to be it's going to be an interesting draft class, see where these guys land. And yeah, I really appreciate hearing all of those rankings. Like I said, I'm going to update mine based on what you guys said. I don't care if anyone else listens to this podcast, that you guys are here for me to update my stuff and for me to get better. And hopefully if people are listening to this, that they're getting better as well, listening to these two great guys. And before we leave for today, we have a tradition here on the 2-on-1 Fantasy Sports to drop some free nuggets. And so why don't we start with Jay this time? What is your free nugget for today? Some words of wisdom, advice, either from a draft standpoint, fantasy, Debbie, anything.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me in terms of how I would recommend people approach, people listen to this or are listening to learn how to evaluate rookies, evaluate players, is again, something I touched on earlier. Try not to categorize players as like my guys or good or bad, but really understand, what guys do well, what they struggle with, and try to get to the point where you can then apply that within, either similar players that have played those roles on certain offenses, or even learning about, NFL schemes and just sort of the basic concepts that a lot of teams run and how that fits into what coaches want to do. And then in combination with that, really find a resource on offensive line. Whether it's off-season analysis, who's gotten better, who's gotten worse, or there are people out there doing really great stuff, on a week-to-week analysis level. It's really an untapped edge, both for fantasy and then also even within betting on football. So those are my two things. Evaluate players on a what are they good at, what are they not good at spectrum, and then really try to find a way to evaluate and assess offensive and defensive line matchups.
Yep, love that. Yep, shout out to Brad Wire FF from the Undroppables for curating all of our O-line rankings that have been showing up on Google at like the top 5 of the list. So he's going to definitely keep those up during the season. And yeah, those are great free nuggets, Jay. Especially the not having the my guys, right? Like we all get into kind of take lock sometimes with some of these guys that we're high on, or some guys that we just like Juba Hubbard for me. But we'll see where he lands. How about you, Felix? What's your free nuggets for today?
I mean, my free nuggets are related to the class in and of itself. I know the advice is always you have to draft running backs in rookie drafts. But this wide receiver class is so deep that I think it would be a mistake to force the issue at running back. I mean, we had Dave Richard on the Debbie Debate yesterday, and we did a 2-round rookie mock draft, and like Seth Williams, Dime Brown, Tamarion Terry, Daz Newsome, they weren't even drafted. Now this is super flex tight end premium.
Not at all. Not drafted at all.
No, 2 round. No, two.
Okay,
rounds.
just 2. Okay.
2 rounds. I'm just saying, like these are guys that you'll be able to get in the 3rd round. And quite frankly, I just don't know how many of these wide receivers I'm going to be able to, I don't know how many of these running backs that I'm going to be rostering in this class, because the number of running backs that I'm interested in this class is so small. but then combine that with I have to be able to get them at the value that I'm comfortable with, and
Right.
quite frankly, that I'm just not sure that that's going to happen. Like I'm going to take Jamar Chase over Najee Harris. I'm going to take Elijah Moore over Kenny Gainwell, or the running backs like around that area. So my advice, at least in this class, is just to be mindful of that. Like I don't want to miss with rookie picks, and I think that there are a lot of potential. You could bust with some of the running backs in this class. So, and I think, quite frankly, that some of the wide receivers are safer.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm with Felix 100% on that. I mean, I think that from the top all the way down, the wide receiver class is head and shoulders above the running back class in terms of just the quality of prospects. And then even outside of that, you have some really good quarterback prospects at the top. It's actually a great year for tight ends as well. Everybody knows about Kyle Pitts, but even as you get down to 2, 3, some real good prospects. So I wouldn't be locked into taking a running back. In fact, I would probably look elsewhere because I don't see a guy who's going to have a huge impact outside of maybe 1 or 2, and then beyond that, somewhat dependent on draft capital, the role these guys have, but not quite there in terms of the top end talent, where the other positions you really do. And then the depth, the receiver depth, as Felix said, it's very strong this year.
Yeah.
I love the tight end class.
On the running back, there's like no depth in the running back class. Yeah, those tight ends, we get like even down to like Kenny Yeboah. It's not just your 1 or 2. There's a few guys out there that could be good. And yeah, that's one thing too. I totally agree, Felix. I've been tweeting out to a couple times, just outside. You have like the 108. Or just outside the first couple of picks, if they go running backs, then you might want to just totally pivot and go for those high end wide receivers, because there's a lot of them, and you can stack a pretty nice rookie core with some wide receivers that are going to make an impact. Like that's the one thing for sure. We know a lot of these guys are going to make an impact, and maybe wait for those dart throws at the running back later, because who knows what they're going to do. So but I appreciate all that insight. Fantastic free nuggets. And before we leave, why don't you guys let us know where we can find your work, what we should be looking out for. Felix, let's start with you.
You can find me at Sharp Review. You can find me at campustocanton.com. One of the things that I'm proudest of, I do a lot of podcasting. The Debbie Debate airs every Wednesday night. We've had episodes with Alan True of 24/7 Sports, Dave Richard of CBS Sports, Brandon Lejeune has been on. But the thing that I love to do the most is writing, and I have a story pinned to my profile, to my Twitter page, a profile on Texas wide receiver Troy O'Meary that I'm really proud of. So I would, appreciate it if y'all took a look and let me know what you thought.
Yeah, that's great. Some fantastic guests. Are you still doing the Sharp Review, your original pod?
It was. I haven't done it in a long time, and it was so difficult to do and required such a high amount of creative energy that when I do it again, I want to be able to do it right and do it consistently. So I haven't, but I have designs to get back into it. Just don't know when.
Got too much going on, man. But all great stuff. Make sure you're out there following Felix at the Sharp Review and at Sharp Review. And Jay, what about yourself? Where can we find your work? What should we be looking out for?
I really just want to plug just one thing, and that's the Fantasy Football Astronauts Rookie Draft Guide. Just released today over at FF, as in Fantasy Football, astronauts.com. So ffastronauts.com. It's something that listeners are going to have to purchase or access through the Patreon, but some really great collaborators coming at these prospects from all different angles. Something I spent a ton of time on. Watching film, grading quarterbacks, running backs. So, real excited about the product. I think it's easy on the eyes, some great design work, just a pretty cool resource. So that's what I'll plug. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at JMoyerFB. as in football. This is where I post a lot of video breakdowns, especially as we get into the NFL season. I really try to do some in-depth stuff there. So, that's really it. But thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, I was very very thankful that you're willing to come on my show and talk with us today. And yeah, fantastic breakdowns. And the draft guide, it's worth it. I've seen a preview of it. It's great. Fantastic graphics. I mean, the graphics and the design, the look of everything the Astronauts does is really cool. But the breakdowns and your information on there is easy to read. Like, it's not. Sometimes you see these guys, it's like a wall of text or numbers or what, but it's easy on the eyes. It's easy to read, digest that information, and it's all quality content. So make sure you go and purchase that draft guide. And so thank you, both of you, so much for joining me today on the 2-on-1 Fantasy Sports Podcast presented by the Undroppables. Make sure you like and subscribe below. Go to wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to not only the Devy Debate and the Fantasy Football Astronauts, but also type in the Undroppables in the search bar and subscribe to all 4 of the great podcasts in the Undroppables network of podcasts. Leave a rating and a review while you're at it. And until next time, thanks for stopping by the 2-on-1. Peace.